Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Books My Dad, who was a PhD in English literature, thinks I should read because reading them improves my understanding of good literature, also known as Gwen aimlessly chatters about real literature. So, we're back to Dad's list of books. His list of improving books. His list of books that mostly I don't like because I am just so shallow. I just can't deal with it. So this is a book that we know as literature because in the particular edition of the book that I took out of the library, somebody wrote a study guide for it in 1994 and they slapped it on at the end of the book because that seems like a good idea. Let's make sure that everybody's reminded that a book is literature by putting a study guide at the back of it. That'll help. So what is this book? This book is Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. Now, I know this is part of a series. I can't avoid knowing it's part of a series because when I took it out of Overdrive, it had this little subtitle-y thing that you can click on, the Hyenish Cycle or something like that. And so that means that it's a series because it wouldn't have that if there wasn't a series. Anyways, um, and this is actually not that great a cover because the bottom of it is supposed to be the home of our protagonist, Shevek, which is a moon, and that moon is like 90% desert. It's a moon, and that means that there's not a lot of life on it, not a lot of vegetation, not a lot of things there that will allow people to survive all that easily. And frankly, it's not that great a place to live unless you have ideological reasons for thinking it's awesome, which obviously he does because, well, we'll get to that. The top of this, however, I think is problematic because one assumes that this is supposed to be Urras. Now, Urras is the planet that the desert moon is circling. The desert moon is Anarres, and this planet is Urras. Well, the thing about the planet Urras is that it's very clearly a hardcore capitalist society. And it's supposed to be a planet that's full of life and people and things and art and excitement and stuff. And frankly, that's a big empty field. Now, there's nothing wrong with big empty fields. Big empty fields can be gorgeous, and mountains can be gorgeous, and lush green rolling hills of wherever can be fantastic. But Urras is supposed to be teeming with life, and it's supposed to be dramatic and dynamic and filled with action in a way that Anarres isn't, because it's a very life-filled planet, and that comes up in two places in the book significantly, and that is the chapter in the book when Shevek first comes to Urras, and he is taken aback by how green things are and how many animals there are and how exciting and dynamic and attractive and constantly moving everything is. And it comes up at the end of the book when the Terran, that is native to Earth woman, talks about how Earth is dead, that we killed it, which we all know we're in the process of doing. Let's freely admit it. Frankly, I think it seems too late, and luckily I'll be dead by the time it happens. But the thing is that she talks about how it's so green and so full of life and so wonderful and marvelous. And both of these are very, very emphatic points that come to us from people who have grown up in places that do not have vast amounts of life, large numbers of animals, that don't have large amounts of greenery, that don't have these things. And they look at places that have these things and they see a sort of a utopia, which The Dispossessed is apparently, ostensibly, somehow, in some depressing, aggravating ways, it's a utopia. It's an ambiguous utopia, the subtitle reads. And frankly, I don't like talking about utopias very much because I feel like the whole concept of a utopia is not a very useful one. Dystopias are useful in terms of discussing human nature, whereas utopias are all about the fact that you can't manage one, which, frankly, I find it a tiresome discussion. Dystopias are useful because it's about saying, how do we avoid doing this? A utopia is about saying, well, you could try this, but it'll suck. And I'm not really sure that having a conversation that boils down to, well, you could try it, but it'll suck, is really worth having. I leave you all, of course, to debate this point. As I always say, am notoriously shallow, and frankly, I'm not very good at philosophy because I get aggravated too easily. So Shevek is a man who just wants to do physics. I mean, yes, of course, he wants to expand the bounds of human understanding, and he wants to create this unified field theory type thing. But the creation of the unified field theory is it's a creative impulse in him. It's not, he's not doing it for fame or glory or any other things like that. It's that he just wants to do the physics. He just loves numbers. He just loves doing the math. Um, the other thing that is very important to him, of course, is his freedom as an Odonian, as a member of the people who left for Anarres and have tried to create this sort of complex, weird commune up there. And the thing is that the entire book builds up as far as the moon Anarres goes, it builds up eventually to just rehashing that old saw that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. The whole point of Anarres was to create a world where there was no ruling class, where there was no government, where there was no money, etc., etc. The problem is, of course, that people wind up needing governments because when you have people who live together in groups, somebody has to organize things. Somebody has to look at a list and say, listen, we need 5 people to dig a ditch, and we need 8 people to clean that thing, and we need this many people. And in the end, you need some kind of organizing principle. If you do not have some kind of organizing principle, then even if everybody's pitching in, they won't necessarily know how best to pitch in. Somebody has to organize, which means somebody or something has to be in charge. And so they have a system that is designed not to put people in charge, but it does anyways, because people have to assign things. And people have to be involved in this. And so yes, they have a computer that does a lot of things of that nature, but people still do this. And so what happens, of course, is by the time 150 years have passed, which is when our novel takes place, 150 years after everybody fled the surface of Urras for this horrific little moon that has, like, nothing on it, 150 years later, governments and organization have wound up developing despite the best efforts of everyone involved, and they don't even really realize it. And it isn't until you have Shevek who just wants to publish, who just wants to talk to people outside of their little commune, it isn't until he gets to that, until he starts trying to do that, that he runs into the wall of people not letting you do things because they think you shouldn't. And, instead of an oligarchy, you've got a government of the masses who have been indoctrinated in this particular philosophy of the world. and they all threaten violence against him just because he wants to not be there. He wants to be able to travel and come back again. And so and they wind up realizing that they have accidentally created government, and that, things have to change, and that they have to constantly watch themselves so that it doesn't happen. Okay, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And I'm not really feeling very rewarded by having gotten that from this book. I'm not feeling particularly rewarded by the fact that part of this just appears to be the grass is greener on the other side. Because when he was on Anarres, he was living in a place that didn't have all these plants, that didn't have all this art, that didn't have all this history and culture. And, he discovers it and finds it absolutely glorious, because art and history and culture and green things and all that stuff, it's all wonderful. And it isn't until he's there that he discovers how awesome Anarres is. But when he's on Anarres, a lot of stuff sucks too. Like the fact that their whole society kept on seemed to really deliberately be trying to pull him and his partner, common law spouse, really apart. And there are a lot of things that you see in that society that frankly don't sound very good, because they're done with an effort, a mind towards indoctrinating people that this is the best way to live. And there's so much in this book that it's very interesting, and there's a lot of depths, and it's very well written, and it's kind of a page turner, I guess, but I didn't enjoy it very much. I don't tend to enjoy books where I feel like there's somebody standing behind me and lecturing in my ear. And this book felt very much throughout it as though somebody was standing right behind me and lecturing in my ear about the problems of human nature and what those things do to society, and so on and so forth. And I get it. It's an ambiguous utopia, which basically means it's fundamentally not a utopia. But I'm not really that interested in reading about a utopia that's only masquerading as a utopia, because it isn't really. And I certainly don't find it very engaging to read about a man who has decided that the only thing that brings us all together is pain. However right he may be, I'm shallow enough to not want to go there. Besides, if I want to read about pain, I can read Harriet Said, which is just, it takes just flops around in how horrifically grim things are. Anyways, so, objectively speaking, I can say this is a very good book. I can say it's got interesting ideas. It's got a lot of ideas. It's well written. It's kind of temporally complicated, which is probably at least partially the author's playing around with the idea of temporal simultaneity. That is, that concept that time is not a straight line. Time is a thing that dipsy doodles and exists simultaneously everywhere, and that all things exist in all times. So this book alternates between what's going on when he's on Urras and what was happening when he was on Anarres that led to him going to Urras, and so on and so forth. And I've killed a lot of time on this and not really said all that much. But anyways, maybe somebody will find this useful. If not, maybe you should read the study guide at the copy of this particular version. The publication details are in the description below. So that's everything for this, and I will see you all next week with a book that I actually liked when I read it. Yeah, that's everything. See you next week.